بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا كثيرا. فما بعد, my dear brothers and sisters, we are on our lessons on raising a Muslim child, and as I told you, the responsibility of raising children is especially more for us Muslims, because raising children is not simply about feeding them and clothing them and giving them a dry place to sleep. I may have mentioned this before, but in case I didn't, and even if I did, there is something that I do in my workshops or lectures that I do for parents. I ask people, I asked them, I said, how many of you have one kid? So somebody will raise, how many have two kids, three kids? So I do this a couple of times. And then I tell them, kids are the young of goats. The young of human beings are called children. They are not kids. So if you don't believe me, look it up, right? Kids are the young of goats and sheep. Sheep actually they're called lambs. Kids are goats, young goats. So I think the first thing to decide is if you have a young goat or if you have a young human being, because the rules of upbringing are different. For a young goat, all you need to do is to feed it and clothe it, not clothe it, feed it and keep it dry and clean, and that's it, right? You're done. But for a young human being, a lot more is required. And today, the biggest crisis that we have is that of children who are raised up without ethics, without morals, and without values. What we even call education today has been reduced to a means of earning a living. Just as I speak to you now, there is a huge crisis that is happening, a huge scandal that's happening in India, where there is this group of youngsters. One is, I think, 19 or 20. The other one is 18-year-old girl, and there's a whole bunch of them. This boy, who is about 19 or 20, mercifully none of them are Muslim, but this boy created an app for buying and selling of human beings, and he put on that app the pictures and names and so on of Muslim women who are then auctioned. Now, obviously, there's nobody kidnapped them and sold them, but the point is that imagine if your daughter's name is in that app or your wife's name is in that app, how would you feel? Now, think about this. The reason I'm mentioning this is because if you'd ask me to create an app, right, I would just put up my hand, because I simply do not have the technical knowledge to create an app. I can just about use apps. So here is a young man who is intelligent enough to create an app. His knowledge is technical and he is competent enough, technologically speaking, to be able to create an app. But what's the app he creates? He creates an app to auction people. Slavery, right? To promote slavery. And that promoting of slavery is doing with Muslim women. But it doesn't matter whether Muslim women or Hindu women or any women. I mean, imagine somebody creates an app to buy and sell human beings. And on top of that, this is a huge hit because there are a lot of people who are bidding on this app for these women who are real people. They're like people like our own mothers and sisters and daughters and wives. Now think about this. How does it happen? We are not talking. A lot of us are we say no, education will solve. Education will not solve everything. Education will not solve everything. Just think about this. The people who designed and built and constructed Hitler's gas chambers were engineers. They were very highly qualified engineers. The people who sold all that equipment to Hitler were businessmen who were also very highly educated. And all the global leaders who sat and watched while these things were brought and installed, and then 6 million innocent people died. 6 billion innocent people died. Men, women, and children, while the world watched in silence. Global leaders watched in silence. Every single one of those global leaders who watched in silence was an educated man or woman. They did not lift a finger. Not a single one of those people needed or should have died or needed to have died. The Holocaust need not have been started at all. And I'm not talking about Hitler. Hitler wanted to do that. I'm saying the world could have stopped him. The world could have stopped him in his tracks on day one. Because none of what he was doing was secret. It was all done in public. The world could have stopped him on day one. The world could have stopped him on day 2 and day 3 and day 4 and day 50 and day 100. Those 6 million people died not only because of Hitler's decision, but because of the active and passive collaboration and collusion of highly educated people in leadership positions. So what are we talking about here? What are we talking about here? We are talking about a complete bankruptcy, not even a lack, a total bankruptcy of ethics and morals and values. That is what we are facing today. I gave you 2 examples. One example from the 1930s, one example now. Same thing. Nothing has changed in almost 100 years. My brothers and sisters, raising children is the number one critical activity and responsibility of a human being. That's why I say to people, if you are not prepared to do what it takes to raise morally sound, ethically sound, value-based children with conscience that work, then it's better that you do not have children. Because just raising children, just having children, and feeding them and clothing them and throwing gadgets at them, because that's our latest, we think that as long as you throw enough money and you throw enough gadgets at your child, that your child is going to grow up into this wonderful human being. He will not. He will not grow up into a wonderful human being. He or she, and we are seeing here, women and men, there is no difference whatsoever. This app which is created in India, there is an 18-year-old girl involved in that. And there is this 19 or 20-year-old boy, and there are others, all in their teens. Men and women. It's a big, big responsibility. So please, treat this seriously. Today, young Muslim parents are very anxious to ensure that their children are brought up as practicing Muslims and as a credit, and they are a credit to themselves and to their parents. There's a lot of talk about this. People are talking about homeschooling because they feel that the atmosphere in the schools is not really great, and so on and so forth. All power to them. I ask Allah to help them. But they must be aware that this is hard work. To create an investment that will yield great returns long after they are gone. The child is your sadaqah jariyah. The child is your sadaqah jariyah. It is your ongoing charity. The actions of the child will come to you, and you will benefit from those actions, even if the child does not intend that to happen. Even if the child doesn't make an active intention and say, I want my tilawat al-Quran, or I want my hajj, or I want my this, whatever activity I'm doing, I want this to benefit my parent. He doesn't have to say that, he doesn't have to have the niyyah, this will automatically benefit you. But if he is doing it, If you have a child who never taught to pray and he's sleeping in his house while the salah is going on, it's not going to benefit you. Right? So think about that. The alternative is to leave behind a legacy of horror, and that will yield its own result. May Allah save us from that. Now, what kind of investment our children will be is entirely up to the parents. Now, many people feel that they want to sort of spoon feed and handhold. I want to quote for you what E.M. Foster said. He said, spoon feeding in the long run teaches us nothing but the shape of the spoon. So stay far away from that. Now, Islam recognizes the nuclear family, husband, wife, children, as the basic building block of society. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned parents over a dozen times in the Quran and honored them and enjoined upon children that they must respect and obey and treat them with kindness, especially when they are old. Allah Jalla Jalaluhu mentioned the relationship of the spouses and He called it one of His ayat. He called it one of His signs. And He emphasized its qualities of faithfulness and tranquility and love and mercy. And He said, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُم مَّوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِقَوْمٍ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. Allah said, which means, and among His signs is this, that He created for you wives, spouses, azwajan, spouses from among yourselves, that you may find tranquility in them, and He has put between you affection and mercy. Verily, in that indeed are signs for people who reflect. About the duty to parents and how children should relate to them, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in Surah Al-Luqman, which means, and we have enjoined on man to be dutiful and good to his parents. His mother bore him, she carried him in weakness and hardship upon weakness and hardship. And his weaning is in 2 years. Give thanks to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, give thanks to me and to your parents, and unto me is the final destination. However, all this is based on the responsibility that He, Jalla Jalaluhu, sent the parents with. The honor is a result of fulfilling that responsibility. If parents do not fulfill the responsibility and instead misguide children and encourage them to disobey Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala set the limits of obedience. In Surah Al-Ankabut, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, which means, and we have enjoined on man to be good and dutiful to his parents, but if they strive to make you join with me in worship, anything as a partner of which you have no knowledge, then do not obey them. Unto me is your return, and I shall tell you what you used to do. So, obedience is wajib, is compulsory on the children, obedience of parents, except when the parents tell the children or try to compel the children to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the first and foremost of which is shirk. But any other disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also comes in this. A big misconception that Muslim parents have is that their responsibility is like that of any other parent. Feed them, clothe them, shelter them, send them to a good school, usually meaning expensive school, and safeguard their future by investing for them if they have the funds to do that, and that's it. Well, it isn't. Given that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent Muslims with a special responsibility, it can and must be argued that merely taking care of the physical and to an extent emotional needs of the child is not sufficient for a child which has come with his destiny written to be a leader. As was the practice of kings of old, princes and princesses were taught and raised differently from ordinary people. They were raised to prepare them for the responsibility that their birth loaded them with. The son or daughter of the monarch had his or her career choice predetermined. They have no choice in the matter. and so they must prepare for it. We have myriad examples of what happened to those who prepared and those who ignored that responsibility and simply spent their lives in pursuit of pleasure. They lost everything, including their privileged positions and, in many cases, their heads. I argue that the Muslim child is in the same position, not as a future king or queen, but as a leader, leading not to worldly success alone, but to success in both worlds. Therefore, he or she must be prepared and equipped to fulfill that trust. He or she must be treated differently, taught differently, enabled differently, and inspired differently. It is not for the young of the golden eagle to be taught to scratch in the dirt for worms. He must be taught to fly in the eye of the storm and take his prey on the wing. Allama Iqbal Rahmatullahi alayhi said in his nazam called Ek Naujawan Ke Naam, to a young man, to a young person, तेरे सोफे हैं अफरंगी, तेरे कालीन है ईरानी, लहू मुझको रुलाती है जवानों की तनासानी। अमारत का शिकोए खुसरवी भी हो तो क्या हासिल। अमारत क्या है? अमारत क्या, शिकोए खुसरवी भी हो तो क्या हासिल। ना ज़ोरे हैदरी तुझमें, न इस्तिग़नाए सलमानी। न ढूंढ इस चीज़ को तहज़ीब हाजिर की तजल्ली में, कि पाया मैं इस्तिग़ना में मेराज मुसलमानी। उक़ाबी रूह जब बेदार होती है जवानों में, नज़र आती है उसको अपनी मंजिल आसमानों में। न हो न उम्मीदी ज़वाल इल्म व इरफ़ा है, उम्मीद मर्द मोमिन है खुदा के राज़दानों में। नहीं तेरा नशेमन क़स्र सुल्तानी की गुंबद पर, तू शाही है बसेरा कर पहाड़ों की चट्टानों में। The very beautiful nazam, and the meaning of it, which it starts from the first share, तेरे सोफ़े हैं अफरंगी, तेरे कालीन है ईरानी, लहू मुझको रुलाती है जवानों की तनासानी. He says, your sofas are from Europe, your carpets are from Iran. The luxury and ease seeking of youth makes me cry tears of blood. He says, leave alone leadership, amarat, leave alone leadership. What use is it even if you get the pomp of Khusro? You have neither the power of Haidar, that is Sayyidina Ali bin Abi Talib radhiyallahu anhu, nor the contentment of Salman al-Farsi. Do not seek in the glitter of modern society, don't seek this, which is, don't seek the courage of Sayyidina Ali or the istighna or contentment of Salman al-Farsi radhiyallahu anhu. He said, do not seek this in the glitter of modern society, for in contentment I have found the peak, the mirage of being Muslim. Only when an eagle, he's talking about an uqab, which is the golden eagle, he says, only when the golden eagle's spirit awakens in youthful hearts does it see its destination in the heavens. Despair not, for despair is the decline of knowledge and understanding. The faith of the believer is in the hearts of those who know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he says, your home, he's talking to the golden eagle, he's talking to the young Muslim. He says, your home is not on the dome of the royal palace. You are an eagle, make your home on the rocks of the mountains, on the peaks of the mountains. I'm sure all Urdu speakers, especially those who make it a point to agitate for the protection and development of Urdu, have children who know these verses and can understand them. If not, we need not seek further than within ourselves the answer to why it is that almost a century after Allama Iqbal said these words, we are still scratching in the dirt. Development and change happens when we work for it, not when we shout about its need but actually do nothing. Urdu will develop when we learn and teach it to our children, not when we agitate for the government to support what we don't. I've met many parents who struggled very hard to overcome difficult circumstances in their childhood, especially in my consulting work with business families. I've met many business founders who say to themselves and to everybody else with great emotion, very great passion, tears in their eyes, I will never allow my children to face the hardship that I had to go through. They say this really very passionately from their heart. When I hear this statement, I tell them, why don't you reword this statement? Why don't you change the words and say instead, I will never allow my children to build resilience and character and strength. I will never allow them to have the power that I had to succeed. Now they're shocked. This response comes as a shock to them because they were expecting appreciation. They never thought about their view on raising of children in that light. But that is the truth. Overprotection and mollycoddling is the worst thing that parents can do to their children. And forgive me for saying that, but by and large, I'm not letting the men off the hook, but by and large, it is the mothers who do this. Mollycoddle and protect their children, and children manipulate them. The women don't even understand how the child is manipulating them. They mollycoddle them and they do that, and they create and they produce children who are completely incapable of surviving on their own. It's almost like the mother wants to break the leg of the child so that the child can never walk, so that she can then support him all the time. She wants the child next to her, tied to her apron strings with a noose around his neck. I'm sorry this sounds bad, but that is how it is. Overprotection and mollycoddling is the worst thing that you can do to the children. And all we need to do is to look around us and see what our children are suffering from. Yes, suffering, overfeeding, for example, paranoid mothers, or starvation. What do you see? Obese, fat little children? Or do you see thin children? I'm not talking about children who are thin because they are starving or because they are, in refugee camps. I'm talking about so-called well-to-do parents. Child obesity is a very major health hazard today. Why does it happen? This mollycoddling and overfeeding produces fat, flabby freaks that are fit for nothing and can achieve nothing. So decide what you want your child to be, and then throw out all the garbage in your fridge and chuck him out into the playing field. If he returns with his shirt clean and his knees unscraped, send him out again until he learns the real meaning of football or whatever sport he's playing. Because life is a contact sport. Life is a contact sport. Let him learn the real meaning of football. Life is a contact sport. Greenhouse trees cannot survive in the real world. One gust of wind will knock them flat. We need gnarled oaks with deep roots that can withstand the vagaries of climate, waterless summers, and the mauling of gales in freezing winter, yet stand firm, giving shade to the traveler and bearing witness to life. That takes nurturing. That is a lot more than merely feeding Cerelac and bananas. It takes wisdom, the willingness to allow them to fall, bandage the wound but ensure that the lesson is learnt. Parenting requires the parents to develop themselves to a level where they become the inspiration in the lives of their children. It requires us to face the fact that ignorant parents can only produce ignorant children. Parents who have no books in the house will not have children addicted to reading. Parents whose conversation centers around the lives of other people cannot have children who can speak about great ideas and dream of changing the world. Parents whose major life decisions are which dress to wear or which handbag to carry, they cannot guide children who are struggling with existential questions relating to their purpose in life. Parents need to wake up and face the fact that their problems related to raising children are really a reflection of how little they have invested in themselves. Paupers can hardly be expected to help others. The time to change is now. It's never too late. Today we are sitting and facing a world where one of my dear friends, who's a psychiatrist, he tells me that in his waiting room, in his consulting practice as a consulting psychiatrist, in the waiting room, there are patients who are contemplating suicide. Right? They tried suicide. They tried slashing the wrists and so on. So they have now come for counseling. There are patients who want to murder somebody. They actually consciously tried and planned, in some cases maybe even tried to murder somebody. Guess what is the age of the patient? 8 years and 9 years old. 7 years old. 7-year, 8-year and 9-year-old children are committing suicide, attempting suicide. They want to murder somebody. This is our society. Believe me, none of those children drop from heaven. They all have parents. They all have parents. What kind of parenting is this? What kind of society are we producing? And if you think that you are living in this isolated, nice little house and everything is hunky-dory and that you and your children will be safe, you will not, because the outside world is all full of people like this. What will happen to you when you go out there? Our only choice is to send this message and convey this message and work very hard to have responsible parents, not parents who wash their hands of responsibility. Responsible parents who focus on ethics and values and morals and who want to raise children who will be a credit to themselves and to their parents. Muslim families today spend far too little time in inculcating the value of contribution, of each generation creating its own legacy and not being content to ride on the back or the coattails of the earlier generation. They give their children the same education that is given to the children of ordinary people who are not Muslim. They don't prepare their children for the distinctly different responsibility that they will have to shoulder. This is not arrogance. It is merely recognizing the fact that the Muslim child is going to inherit a mission that is completely different from everyone else. They have been sent to give, not to take. So they must build a treasure house of faith and wisdom and compassion and courage and talents, because you can only give what you have. It is essential for them to understand the distinctly different responsibility that comes with such a mission, for which they will be answerable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Parents often equate expense with quality. They give their children the most expensive education, most expensive clothes. This most expensive education many times insulates them from the realities of life, and they never learn how to fight real battles. I've seen fancy schools advertising, we have air-conditioned classrooms. That is their advertisement. We give every child a laptop. Is this all education is? What is wrong if the child is going to sit in an unair-conditioned classroom? I'm not talking about in the freezing winter like in a place like Massachusetts. I'm talking about countries where, tropical countries and other countries where air conditioning is not required. Yes, it is uncomfortable when it's hot. So what? That is life. That is the world. The world is not air conditioned. But we want our child to be completely protected from the environment. But he's going to go out into that environment. How will he be prepared to face that environment when he or she goes out into that environment? Most schools, that's why, are very keen for the child to feel good. And they bend over backwards to make the child happy. Parents love it. Children obviously love it. But in the process, the children learn nothing about life. They learn nothing about how to fight the real battles. Parents set no boundaries. The school teaches no boundaries. And children grow up with the feeling that as long as they're happy, they can do whatever they like. Nothing is more destructive for the child than this attitude, which is, as long as I'm happy, that's all that matters. That is the worst way of living. As long as you're happy, your happiness is not the criterion, the benchmark for what is good and evil. There are many people who are very, very evil, doing very evil things, and they're very happy doing them. They go to bed very peacefully and sleep. Does it make their action better? Does it make their action acceptable? My brothers and sisters, seriously, let us think. This world is not only about us. If you are going to raise children who tomorrow, because of your raising, if they do evil, remember that will also come to you in your graves. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to enable you to have children who will be a credit to you and to themselves, and who will be people who will have the rida and the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But get prepared. I'm going to do the whole series of lectures on this. Get prepared to work very hard. And remember, this is worth it. Because you are the one who will benefit from this. Not me, you. وصلى الله على النبي الكريم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين برحمتك يا رب العالمين. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.